I'm Shelly Kraicer. Chinese name is Xiefeng. I help here at VIFF program Chinese language movies, movies from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. I'm more familiar, specifically with, say, mainland China. And as people know, there are lots of constraints that Chinese filmmakers work under, commercial constraints and political censorship constraints. And that does that does definitely affect the kind of films that we can show in festivals. Not always restricting films to, not always making the choice too narrow. I'm really pleased that I got the films I wanted to get this year here for VIFF. But let me just give you examples. I have to analyze very briefly a bit Chinese film production, super briefly. There are big blockbusters, commercial films. There are, at the opposite end of the scale, there are small independent films, 独立电影. And in the middle, there are medium-sized films, art films made for festivals. That middle range is doing fine, I think. The big blockbusters, turns out, aren't really available this year because of October 1st. It's the Chinese market plus Chinese government policy, where a lot of films are held up until after the big anniversary celebration coming up next week. Out of caution, out of a sense of clearing Chinese film screens for propaganda kind of films that are suitable for October 1st, which just means that festivals have fewer of the big blockbuster films available because their releases in China are all being pushed to later in the year. Christmas period, December, which is a big slot, or next year, Chinese New Year. So no big films around. The tiny independent end, which is where I do a lot of my research and used to do a lot of writing about, the ecosystem for those in China has really changed since I started working intensively in Chinese cinema in around 2003. There used to be gray areas where if you kept your head down, you kept low profile, you could make the films. It's still possible to make the films. There's no sort of apparatus watching who films, because digital cinema making can be small crews, small cameras, it can be discreet. But there was also a way to show the films in China at a series of independent film festivals and exhibition, 论坛, if they don't use the official film festival. And there was a certain tolerance in what went overseas. But since 2012, those gray areas, that sort of marginal space where little films could exist without explicit censorship approval, has shrunk to almost zero. So that can't be shown in China. There are no more independent film festivals. There are much stricter laws about how films can get out of the country and be shown in foreign festivals. Sometimes those laws are applied unevenly or unpredictably, but the laws are on the books. So if you're a producer and you've invested in a little film, you're going to be much more careful in waiting to get Chinese government approval before you'll show it. Most producers, not everyone. So I was saying before, right, so this affects the sort of availability of really small indie films. And as I mentioned before, blockbusters are kind of out of the market for a while. Fortunately, there are lots of strong Chinese sort of middle range films, and we've got a lot of them here. Spring Tide by Yang Li Na has censorship approval, but it also has a real independent edge and feel. It's free and very expressive, and a Chinese woman filmmaker doing a strong story about women with three great actresses, including the magnificent Hao Lei from China, Elaine Jin from Hong Kong, Taiwan. There are films like that. There are films like Lo Ye's, which is a little bigger. It's got some movie stars, but it's a genre film with kind of art film underpinnings. I think it works for a bigger audience of Vancouverites, say, who want to come and see famous actors. It works for cinephiles who want to see Lo Ye. So he's also poised himself in this middle zone. There are films like that. Let me mention one more. Dwelling in the Fuchun Mountains by Gu Xiaogang, which is a pure art film that premiered in the Cannes Film Festival in a sidebar. It's a spectacular visual landscape film based on a Yuan dynasty painting of the same name, dwelling in the Fuchun Mountains. And the directors tried to translate the aesthetics of Chinese ink brush painting into cinema. It's also an incredibly complicated family story. Four brothers and their families, presided over by a grandmother, a matriarch, and the children, kind of in the style of the heroes of the director Gu Xiaogong, who are Taiwanese masters Hou Xiaoxian and Yang Dechong. So he's combined these in a really beautiful, powerful, and moving, complicated drama. The drama passed censorship. It's a pure art film. It can be here too, no problem there. So there are signs of concern and the restriction of the kinds of films that are available, but there are, at the same time, I like to balance things because China's a complicated place, and there's always on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, there's a real upswell or a very encouraging and positive sense that Chinese filmmakers with things to say have space to make those films and get them out to the world.